Elon Musk, the genius behind world-changing tech, secretly gave a diner waitress $50,000. No one saw it coming. But why? Nobody recognized him. Sometimes you just need to exist without your name or status getting in the way. Elon Musk, stepping into a small diner on the rough side of Chicago, was about to blend in like any regular guy. But this wasn't just any visit. He was conducting a secret experiment. Musk wanted to see how people treat someone without the fame, the wealth, or the billion-dollar companies backing them. And that night, he wasn't the tech mogul. He was just another face in the crowd. But little did anyone know his quiet act of kindness would shake them to their core. So what was he really trying to prove? Elon Musk leaned back in the leather seat of his private jet, staring out at the endless city lights below. This trip wasn't about rockets, Mars, or even electric cars. No, this was personal. An experiment that could either challenge his perception of humanity or confirm his worst fears. The idea had struck him like lightning during a heated debate at a charity gala. Empathy isn't just understanding someone's struggles, it's living them, a guest had said. The words stuck. What would it feel like to be invisible? To be judged by your clothes, not your accomplishments? To walk through a world that didn't recognize your face or your name? The thought intrigued him, haunted him. So here he was, minutes away from stepping into an entirely different reality. His plan was as bold as his business ventures. The disguise was almost laughably simple. A worn-out hoodie, frayed jeans, and sneakers that had clearly seen better days. A makeup artist had added a few subtle touches, dark circles, faint wrinkles, and a dullness to his usually sharp features. When he glanced in the mirror, he hardly recognized himself. That was the point. As the plane landed with a gentle thud, Musk tightened the hoodie around his face. The cold Chicago night greeted him like a slap. The sharp wind cut through his thin layers, a stark reminder of how exposed life could feel without wealth's protective bubble. He took a cab to the south side, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and unease. His destination wasn't some Michelin-starred hotspot. It was a tiny, unassuming diner called Joey's, the kind of place where the coffee is burnt, the food is greasy, and the stories are raw. Musk had heard about it in passing from a friend who'd grown up in Chicago. If you want to see life stripped to its core, go there, they'd said. The neon sign flickered as he approached, and for a brief moment, he hesitated. Was he ready for this? But then, with a deep breath, he pushed the door open, the soft jingle of the bell marking his entrance. Nobody looked up. Nobody cared. For the first time in decades, Elon Musk wasn't the center of attention. And for the first time, it scared him.
The blast of warm, greasy air inside Joey's diner hit Musk like a wave, a sharp contrast to the biting cold outside. His first instinct was to turn around and leave. The place was cramped, the vinyl seats patched with duct tape, and the lighting flickered just enough to make you question its reliability. It was as far from his high-tech labs and pristine offices as you could get. A waitress with tired eyes and a name tag that read Anita approached him. "Table for one?" she asked, her tone polite but weary, like she'd asked that same question 1,000 times today alone. Musk nodded, his voice softer than usual. "Yeah, just me." She gestured toward a booth in the back corner, and he followed. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the gravity in this little diner was somehow different. The clatter of plates, the hum of a jukebox playing a scratchy old tune, and the low murmur of conversations filled the room. As he slid into the booth, the worn leather seat groaned under his weight. Musk's eyes scanned the space, absorbing every detail. At the counter, a group of construction workers laughed loudly, their hands wrapped around steaming mugs of coffee. A young mother wrestled with a cran-wielding toddler at a nearby table, her exhaustion etched across her face. Near the window, an older man in a weathered coat sat alone, staring into a half-empty cup of coffee, as if searching for answers. For the first time, Musk wasn't observing a boardroom full of eager executives or a conference packed with admirers. These people didn't know him, didn't care about him. He was invisible. Anita returned with a menu and placed a chipped mug of water in front of him. "Take your time," she said, her voice softer now, almost kind. "Thanks," Musk replied, glancing at the menu. Everything about this place screamed survival, not comfort, not indulgence, just the bare minimum to get by. He could feel the weight of the stares from other diners, subtle but unmistakable. Whispers floated around him like ghosts. Wonder where he crawled out from, someone muttered, not bothering to lower their voice. Musk tightened his grip on the menu, pretending not to hear. It was working. His disguise was perfect. For the first time in years, Elon Musk wasn't Elon Musk. He was just another stranger. And for the first time, he realized how lonely that felt. Musk's fingers drummed lightly on the table as he debated his order. The laminated menu was sticky, worn at the edges, and filled with comfort food staples: burgers, fries, pancakes, and chili. He settled on the cheapest thing he could find, a bowl of chili. It wasn't about the food, it was about blending in. Anita returned, balancing a tray of drinks for another table. "Know what you want?" she asked, her voice carrying that blend of exhaustion and politeness only years of waitressing could perfect. "Yeah, just the chili," Musk replied, keeping his voice low. She nodded, jotting it down. "Cumin right up." As she walked away, Musk let his eyes wander across the room again. The diner's energy felt both alive and heavy, like it was filled with people carrying burdens they couldn't quite put down. At the counter, the construction workers laughed about something, their voices booming. The young mother coaxed her toddler to eat, a mixture of patience and frustration playing across her face, and the man by the window just sat there, staring into the street like he was watching a life he couldn't join. Musk leaned back, trying to take it all in. This wasn't a world he visited often, and yet, it was one he wanted to understand. The whispers hadn't stopped. "Bet he's homeless," someone murmured from the next table. "Or a scammer," another added. The words stung more than he expected. Musk wasn't used to being judged not like this, not for his appearance. It felt raw, personal. His heart beat a little faster, but he kept his expression neutral. When Anita returned with his chili, her tone softened. "Anything else you need?" she asked, setting the bowl in front of him. "No, this is fine, thanks," he said, managing a small smile. Her gaze lingered for a moment, her eyes searching his face like she was trying to figure something out. But she didn't say anything else, just nodded and walked away. Musk picked up the spoon and took a bite. The chili was simple, nothing extraordinary, but it was warm, and that was enough. As he ate, he could feel the weight of the room pressing in on him, the judgment, the curiosity, the indifference. For the first time in years, Musk wasn't surrounded by yes-men or admirers. He wasn't the genius billionaire everyone wanted a piece of. Here, he was just another guy in a beat-up hoodie, eating a bowl of chili in a corner booth. And for the first time, he wondered if that was how most people felt every single day. The chili was lukewarm, thick, and oddly comforting. Musk stirred it absent-mindedly with his spoon, more focused on the scene unfolding around him than the food in front of him. Joey's diner was alive with unfiltered humanity, a microcosm of everyday life, raw and unpolished. At the counter, one of the construction workers slapped his knee, roaring with laughter over a crude joke that made his buddies howl. The young mother at the corner table was now rummaging through her bag, pulling out a juice box to quiet her restless toddler. The older man by the window hadn't moved, his coffee cup still half full and untouched. Musk noticed his hands, they were rough and weathered, like he'd spent decades working with them, yet now they trembled as if holding the weight of something unseen. Musk's mind raced. These people weren't engineers, investors, or visionaries. They weren't strategizing about colonizing Mars or reinventing transportation. They were just surviving, navigating a world that didn't give them headlines or applause. Anita walked past, carrying a tray of plates. Her movements were swift, practiced, but there was a weariness to her steps. Musk's eyes followed her for a moment. She wasn't much older than him, yet her face carried a kind of exhaustion that made her seem older. Life had pressed its thumbprint into her. "Hey, Anita," one of the guys at the counter called, "when you gonna bring me that refill?" "Soon as I grow a third arm, Gary," she shot back, her tone laced with good-natured sarcasm. The group laughed, but Musk caught the flicker of strain in her expression as she turned away. She was holding it together, but barely. The door jingled as a man in a tattered coat shuffled in. He looked around, hesitant, before settling at the counter. Musk watched as Anita approached him, her tones softening. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yeah," the man mumbled, fishing a few crumpled bills from his pocket. Anita didn't flinch. She just poured him a cup, sliding it over with a quiet smile. Musk felt something tighten in his chest. It was such a small act, almost invisible in its simplicity, but it spoke volumes. This was the world Musk had come to see: the quiet struggles, the small kindnesses, the way people carried on, even when the odds seemed stacked against them. He stirred his chili again, the spoon scraping the bottom of the bowl. In his world, everything was big ideas, big risks, big payoffs. But here, life was different. It was smaller, quieter, and infinitely more personal. And for the first time, he wondered if all the billions in the world could ever match the value of a single, genuine connection. The whispers at the surrounding tables hadn't stopped, and Musk couldn't ignore them anymore. They weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. The words were sharp, cutting through the ambient noise like glass against metal. "Bet he's here to hit someone up for cash," a man at a nearby table muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. "Probably one of those scammers," another chimed in. Musk's grip tightened on his spoon. He kept his head down, pretending not to hear, but each word landed heavier than the last. The irony wasn't lost on him. He, a man worth billions, was being judged as though he had nothing to his name. Anita must have overheard, too, because she paused near his table, her lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't say anything, but the subtle frown on her face spoke volumes. When she approached him again, her tone was softer. "You sure you don't need anything else?" she asked, her voice quieter than before. "No, this is fine," Musk replied, managing a faint smile. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning his face like she was searching for something. Finally, she nodded and walked away, but Musk could feel her concern lingering like a shadow. He took another bite of the chili, though his appetite was fading. Instead, he focused on the people around him. The man who had called him a scammer was now scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the weight of his words. The mother and toddler were gone, their table empty except for a pile of crayon drawings left behind. And the man by the window still hadn't touched his coffee, his gaze locked on something far beyond the glass. Musk's mind churned. Was this how most people lived? Constantly under scrutiny, judged for things as superficial as their clothes or demeanor. He thought of all the assumptions people made about him when they knew who he was, how his name alone changed their tone, their attitude. Without that name, he was just another stranger in a hoodie, invisible and, apparently, unworthy of kindness. The door jingled again, and a young couple entered, laughing softly as they found a booth near the back. Musk noticed how the room seemed to relax around them, the tension he'd felt dissipating slightly. He realized something then: he wasn't just invisible here. He was out of place, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. As he finished the last of his chili, Musk leaned back in the booth, the vinyl creaking under his weight. He had come here to see the world through a different lens, and it was already clearer than he'd expected. This wasn't just a diner. It was a mirror, reflecting the unspoken truths about humanity, its biases, its kindnesses, its raw, unvarnished reality. And for the first time in a long while, Musk felt like he was truly seeing it. As Musk sat in the booth, his bowl of chili now empty, the weight of the evening began to sink in. He wasn't just witnessing the lives of others, he was feeling them in a way he never had before. The judgments, the dismissiveness, the rare but meaningful glimpses of kindness, all of it was raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. Anita returned to clear his table, her movements efficient but "You sure you're done?" she asked, glancing at the empty bowl. "Yeah, I'm good," Musk replied. His voice was softer now, almost hesitant, as though the evening had stripped away some of the confidence he was used to carrying. She nodded, stacking the dishes onto her tray. "Well, let me know if you need anything else." For a moment, Musk considered asking her a question, something simple, something to bridge the gap between their worlds. But he hesitated. What could he possibly say that wouldn't feel forced or hollow? Instead, he watched her as she moved through the diner, weaving between tables with the kind of grace that came from years of experience. Anita wasn't just a waitress. She was a mediator, a problem solver, a source of quiet strength for the people who came through those doors. At the counter, the man in the tattered coat raised his cup. "Thanks for the coffee," he mumbled, sliding a few coins toward Anita. She picked them up, her expression softening. "Don't worry about it," she said quietly, slipping the coins back toward him. The man blinked, his hand hovering over the coins as though unsure what to do. "You sure?" "Yeah," Anita said, her tone firm but kind. "Just take care of yourself." "Okay." Musk felt a lump form in his throat. It was such a small gesture, barely noticeable in the grand scheme of things. But in that moment, it carried more weight than all the grand innovations he'd ever dreamed of. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills to pay for his meal. Cash it felt foreign in his hands, almost archaic. But tonight wasn't about convenience. It was about experiencing life as it was for most people. When Anita came back to his table, he handed her the money. "Keep the change," he said, his voice steady. She glanced at the bills, then back at him. "Thanks," she said, her tone neutral but polite. Musk stood and made his way toward the door. The bell jingled softly as he stepped out into the cold night, but he didn't leave right away. Instead, he lingered by the window, watching Anita as she cleared tables and refilled coffee cups. She wasn't changing the world in the way he was used to thinking about it. No rockets, no inventions, no billion-dollar breakthroughs, but in her own quiet way, she was making it better. And for the first time, Musk wondered if that kind of impact mattered more than anything he'd ever built. The icy wind bit at Musk's face as he stood outside the diner, staring through the fogged-up window. Inside, Anita moved with practiced efficiency, wiping down tables and exchanging quick words with the remaining customers. The energy in the diner had started to shift calmer now, with fewer people and softer conversations. Musk reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against the crisp envelope he'd prepared before this experiment began. He hadn't been sure if he would use it. It had felt presumptuous, maybe even performative. But now, watching Anita work tirelessly, her kindness never faltering despite the long day etched into her features, he knew it wasn't about him, it was about her. He pushed the door open, the bell jingling softly. Anita glanced up, surprised to see him again. "Forgot something?" she asked, pausing in the middle of stacking plates. "Not exactly," Musk said, his voice calm but deliberate. He walked toward her, pulling the envelope from his pocket. "I wanted to give you this." She froze, staring at the envelope in his hand. "What's this for?" she asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "It's just a thank you," Musk said, "for being who you are. For the way you treat people, it matters more than you realize." Anita hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly, like she was trying to gauge if this was some kind of joke. Slowly, she took the envelope from his hand. "Okay," she said cautiously. Musk offered a small, almost shy smile. "Just open it later," he said, "when you've got a moment to yourself." Before she could respond, he turned and walked toward the door, the sound of his sneakers scuffing against the worn linoleum. "Wait," Anita called out, her voice tinged with both curiosity and suspicion. "Who are you, really?" Musk paused, his hand on the door handle. For a moment, he considered leaving without answering, but then, slowly, he pulled back his hood and turned to face her. Recognition flickered across her face, then bloomed into full realization. "Elon Musk," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded slightly, his expression humble. "Kindness matters," he said simply, the words hanging in the air like an unspoken promise. And then he was gone, disappearing into the cold night. Back inside, Anita stood frozen, the envelope trembling in her hands. The few remaining customers stared, their expressions a mix of shock and awe. Slowly, Anita opened the envelope, her eyes widening as she read the handwritten note inside. "Anita, thank you for your kindness. It's people like you who remind us all what matters most. Use this to chase your dreams." Beneath the note was a check for $50,000. Gasps rippled through the diner as Anita's coworkers gathered around her, their disbelief turning into astonished murmurs. "Is this real?" one of them asked. Anita couldn't speak, her eyes filled with tears as she clutched the check, her mind racing. The man in the tattered coat at the counter smiled softly. "Told you, kindness pays off," he said, lifting his coffee cup in a quiet toast. Outside, Musk walked briskly into the Chicago night, the cold air sharp against his skin. His heart felt heavier, but not in a bad way. He had come here to learn something about humanity, and instead, he had left a piece of himself behind. The sound of the diner's bell jingled behind him as Musk stepped out into the cold, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his hoodie. He could still feel the weight of the moment, the stunned silence that had followed his brief interaction with Anita. Her confusion, her disbelief, and the growing realization of who he really was hung in the air like an unspoken question. As he walked down the street, the night air biting at his face, Musk couldn't help but replay the scene in his mind. The way Anita had looked at him, her eyes filled with surprise, then understanding, and finally, awe. The way she had handled the shock with quiet grace, never asking for anything in return. But it wasn't just her reaction that stayed with him. It was the ripple effect that followed. As he stepped further away from the diner, he could almost hear the conversations inside picking up. The gasps, the murmurs, the way everything shifted from judgment to reflection. The whispers about him, the ones that had called him a scammer, an outsider, had turned into something else entirely. Kindness matters. The words echoed in his mind. He hadn't come here to be a savior. He hadn't come to make a grand gesture, or to change the world in one fell swoop. But in that moment, he'd realized something important sometimes. The smallest acts could change everything. Back in the diner, Anita was still standing frozen, the check trembling in her hands. The diner was quieter now, everyone waiting for her to speak, to react, and when she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. He just gave me $50,000. The room fell silent. No one knew what to say. It wasn't about the money. It was about the gesture, about the unexpected kindness that had broken through the walls of assumptions, judgments, and everyday struggles. Anita looked at the check again, as though she couldn't quite believe it. And then, slowly, she tucked it into her apron. She glanced around the room, her gaze meeting those of the other diners and staff. "I don't know what to say," she muttered, her voice thick with emotion. One of the regulars at the counter, an older man with a weathered face and tired eyes, tipped his hat to her. "You don't need to say anything," he said quietly. "Just know you made a difference. You showed us all what really matters." Outside, Musk paused for a moment, looking back toward the diner. The window was fogged up now, but he could almost picture Anita standing there, the check in her hand, her mind racing. What would she do with it? Would she chase a dream she'd put aside long ago? Would she find the courage to step into a new life, one beyond the diner, beyond the constant grind? Musk didn't know. But somehow, that wasn't the point. The point was that, for one fleeting moment, he had reminded someone, maybe even everyone, that kindness, no matter how small, could change everything. The days that followed felt surreal. Musk couldn't shake the memory of Anita's face when she'd opened the envelope. It haunted him in the quiet moments, the look of disbelief transforming into gratitude, into something deeper. He wondered what the gesture had meant for her, what it had meant for everyone in that diner who'd witnessed it. Back in his world, things moved fast: decisions, calculations, breakthroughs. But here, in the dim glow of Joey's diner, he'd witnessed a slower kind of power, one that didn't need headlines or applause. It just was. Musk's experiment wasn't about money. It was about understanding, about shedding the layers of privilege and status that defined him. As he boarded his private jet to return to the familiar world of tech and innovation, he felt a shift inside him. It wasn't a dramatic change, but a quiet understanding. In the end, it wasn't the big ideas or the millions that mattered. It was the small acts of humanity, the kind that could change everything, one person at a time.